The Galactic Military Academy's amphitheater buzzed with the chittering, clicking, and harmonious tones of 200 cadets from 37 different species. Professor Zekthara, a distinguished Vorthak with crystalline carapace that reflected the lecture hall's lights, adjusted the holographic display with one of her 4 arms. "Today we conclude our xenobiology series with humanity," she announced, her voice carrying the musical quality typical of her species. "As you know, humans are considered among the most fragile sentient species in the galaxy." A ripple of agreement passed through the assembled cadets. Everyone knew about humans, the strange bipedal mammals from Sol 3 who had somehow stumbled into galactic society despite their obvious biological deficiencies. "Note their pathetic single heart," Professor Zekthara continued, highlighting the human cardiovascular system in the hologram. Unlike the Thranodes' triple redundant circulatory system, or the Caltharians' distributed cardiac network, humans possess only one. A single puncture and they perish. Cadet Vrex, a towering Gorlanian with rock-like skin, raised a massive hand. "Professor, how did such a weak species even survive long enough to develop spaceflight?" "An excellent question," Zekthara replied. "Prevailing theory suggests extreme luck and the absence of significant predators on their homeworld. Their vision operates on merely 3 color spectrums, primitive compared to our 12. Their hearing range is laughably narrow. They lack natural armor, possess no venom, no psychic abilities, and their reaction times are among the slowest recorded." The professor gestured to another display showing human bone density. "Their skeletons are so brittle that their own planet's gravity can break them. They require approximately 8 hours of unconsciousness daily. Imagine being defenseless for a third of your existence. Most remarkably, they can survive only 3 days without water and mere weeks without food. The Etherians can survive months without sustenance." Young Cadet Siri, an aquatic nereid whose biosuit allowed her to attend land-based classes, bubbled curiously. "Then how are humans military allies? Surely they're a liability in combat." "They serve primarily in support roles," Zekthara explained dismissively. "Engineering, logistics, research. Their governments wisely keep them far from actual combat zones. In war games, human units consistently perform at the bottom percentile. They're simply too—" The lecture hall's doors burst open with a resounding clang. Every head turned as a figure in standard galactic military dress uniform strode down the center aisle. The being was clearly human. Bipedal, around 6 feet tall with the characteristic pale skin and brown hair. What made the cadets collectively gasp, however, was the extensive scarring across the visible portions of his face and hands, and the prominent insignia on his collar, a combat action ribbon with 7 clusters. "Sorry I'm late, Professor," the human said, his voice carrying a casual authority that somehow commanded the vast amphitheater. "Admiral Kethovan asked me to guest lecture, something about providing practical perspective on human combat capabilities. Professor—" Zekthara's crystalline features shifted, through several colors, the Vorthak equivalent, of surprise and embarrassment. Yes, of course. Cadets, this is Colonel Marcus Chen, recently returned from the Outer Rim campaigns." Colonel Chen nodded to the assembled students, seemingly unbothered by their wide-eyed stares. "I couldn't help but overhear the last part of your lecture, Professor. Very thorough analysis of human physiology. All accurate, by the way." He moved to the center of the amphitheater with fluid grace. "It's true, we have one heart. Single-point failure, as any engineer would say." He tapped his chest. "Mine stopped twice during the Battle of Kepler Station. Medic got it going again both times. Finished the mission." Several cadets exchanged confused glances. "And yes, we need 8 hours of sleep daily. When you're pushing through a 48-hour siege defense like at Proxima Colony, that becomes inconvenient." Chen's scarred face bore a slight smile. "So you learned to function anyway. Had a sergeant who stayed awake for 6 days straight, coordinating supply drops while under constant bombardment. Human stubbornness, we call it." The colonel gestured to Professor Zekthara's biological displays. The professor mentioned our brittle bones. Accurate assessment. I've broken 17 bones in combat. Kept fighting with most of them. Amazing what adrenaline and necessity can accomplish. Cadet Vrex, the massive Gorlanian, leaned forward. "But how? Your species seems designed for failure in combat scenarios." Chen's expression grew thoughtful. You know what's interesting about having just one heart, just one brain, just one life? It makes every moment precious. When you can't regrow lost limbs like the Threnodi, or shift between backup organs like the Caltharians, you develop compensations. He began pacing, and something in his movement made even the largest cadets instinctively sit straighter. We call it adaptive persistence. When a Gorlanian warrior falls in battle, it's typically because their impressive natural armor was finally breached. When a human falls, we tend to get back up, because we've been getting back up from impossible situations since we lived in caves. The amphitheater had fallen completely silent. At the siege of Tau Ceti, my unit, 43 humans, held a defensive position against 800 Krillian shock troops. We had no backup organs to rely on, no natural weapons, no psychic abilities. What we had was the understanding that retreat meant the civilian evacuation ships wouldn't reach minimum safe distance. Colonel Chen stopped pacing and looked directly at the cadets. We held for 14 hours. When relief arrived, they found us still in position. 12 of us left standing, but the evacuation was successful. The Krillians later said they'd never encountered such irrationally persistent resistance. Professor Zekthera's crystalline features had shifted to a deep blue, curiosity, mixed with newfound respect. "Colonel, what do you believe gives humans this persistence?" Chen considered the question carefully. "Maybe it's because we know exactly how fragile we are. Every human child learns that they're breakable, mortal, limited. But here's what the textbooks don't teach. When you truly understand your limitations, you also discover that you can push past them." He looked around the amphitheater one final time. The professor is right, we're weak, slow, fragile creatures. But what she didn't mention is that we're also the species that looked at the impossible distances between stars and decided to cross them anyway. We're the species that takes our single heart, our brittle bones and our short lives, and uses them to stand between the innocent and harm. As Colonel Chen walked toward the exit, he paused at the door. "Class dismissed. And remember, strength isn't about what you're built with. It's about what you choose to do with what you have." The amphitheater remained silent long after the human had gone. 200 young warriors from across the galaxy, contemplating the difference between physical strength and the strength of spirit. Professor Zekthara finally broke the silence. "Tomorrow," she announced, "we begin a new unit, the psychology of combat persistence. I believe we have much to learn,